A lonely millionaire faces his birthday as silence fills his vast mansion. A curious little girl wanders in by chance, turning an empty birthday into something unforgettable. Without knowing who he is, the housekeeper's daughter sparks a new beginning in his heart. If you're intrigued by this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The mansion was too quiet on that Thursday night in New York City. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, but only echoes the absence of everything that should have been there and wasn't. The lights of the Upper East Side glittered outside, reflecting off the massive plate-glass windows of the dining room, but inside only a set table waited for someone who might never arrive. A crisp linen tablecloth, silverware aligned with almost geometric precision, a small cake in the center. A single candle waited erect, untouched, like a soldier standing at attention, waiting for orders that would not come. Michael August Thompson had been sitting there for 20 minutes without moving, not because he was waiting for someone. He had learned long ago not to expect anything from anyone anymore, but because he still hadn't decided if it made sense to get up from that chair, go to his bedroom upstairs, and pretend that this day was just like any other. 41 years old. Not a single call. Not a single text. Not a single person. The housekeeper had prepared the cake more out of protocol than any real expectation of a celebration. She knew, as everyone in the house knew, that her boss didn't receive visitors. He had no close friends. He had no family. He had only a gigantic corporation, generous bank accounts, and an emptiness that no amount of zeros in his balance could ever fill. He looked at the candle. He thought about lighting it. He thought about not lighting it. He thought it didn't matter either way. He was about to get up when he heard timid footsteps on the polished marble of the living room. Small, quick, uneven steps. They weren't the firm steps of an employee, they were a child's steps. Michael frowned but didn't look up. Probably the daughter of one of the new cleaning staff. Someone would come get her soon. Until a small, curious voice, completely out of place in that environment of luxury and isolation, shattered the void like a stone shattering glass. "Mister, is that your cake?" He slowly raised his eyes, like someone waking from a trance that had lasted for years. The girl was standing there, a few feet from the table, a pink backpack still on her shoulders, her brown hair messily tied up with colorful hair ties. She must have been about 7, maybe 8 years old. Her brown eyes were looking at the cake with that pure curiosity that only children have, without malice, without calculation, without ulterior motives. Behind her, a woman appeared in a hurry, visibly embarrassed, trying to gently but desperately pull her by the arm. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson." She wandered in without me noticing. I told her to stay in the kitchen, but... The woman was in her early 30s, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her hands red from scrubbing floors. Her face showed the deep exhaustion of someone who works 2 jobs, sleeps too little, and still can't pay all the bills at the end of the month. Michael knew that look. He saw it every day in the hallways of his company, on the faces of the people who cleaned, served, carried, and sustained that entire structure without ever being truly seen. But he didn't answer the woman. His eyes were fixed on the child, who continued to stare at the cake as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. It's my birthday," he said, his voice lower than he intended, almost ashamed to admit it out loud. The girl's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Really?" She looked around the enormous empty room, decorated with expensive furniture and silence. "But where is everybody?" The question hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He felt the air leave his lungs. He didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that a man can have everything and at the same time have no one? How do you say that success and loneliness can walk hand in hand? How do you translate into simple words the emptiness he had carried for so long that he no longer remembered what it was like to be surrounded by people who truly cared? The mother froze, paralyzed between the urge to disappear and the impossibility of making her daughter vanish. The girl looked from the empty table to Michael, trying to understand, with the honest and relentless logic of children, why someone would have a birthday alone. "Are you going to celebrate by yourself?" she insisted, tilting her head to the side. A heavy, dense silence fell, filled with all the truths Michael had never admitted to himself. He could order them to leave. He could end this awkward scene with a curt word, a gesture of authority. He could hide behind the role of the boss, the important businessman, the man who doesn't have to explain himself to anyone. But he did none of that. Something in those childish eyes disarmed him completely. "Looks like it," he replied simply, with a sincerity that surprised him. The girl then did something no one had done in years. Something no executive, no partner, no acquaintance would dare to do. She simply walked to the table. She pulled her hand away from her mother's with determination, discreetly climbed onto the chair next to the cake, stood on her tiptoes to get a better view, and observed the candle with the focus of someone analyzing something very important. "Every time it's my birthday, my mom sings to me," she said, with the naturalness of someone stating an obvious fact of life. "We don't always have a cake, because sometimes we don't have the money. But there's always singing, always." She looked at her mother with a complicity that spoke of years of improvised parties, imaginary cakes, and happiness built with whatever they had. "We can sing. For him too, right, Mum?" The woman was completely paralyzed. Her face was a mix of embarrassment for being there, shame that her daughter was invading her boss's space, and something deeper, something that had to do with dignity, with humanity, with the recognition that here was another human being so alone, he couldn't even celebrate his own birthday. "Leah, no. That's not appropriate. Mr. Thompson must be busy." "But it's his birthday, Mum. Birthdays aren't supposed to be sad." Michael felt his throat tighten. The girl's words reverberated inside him like a bell ringing in an empty church. Birthdays aren't supposed to be sad. When had his birthdays become just another date on the calendar? When had he given up on hoping for something different? If you'd like to," he said, almost in a whisper, fighting the lump forming in his throat. I would like that." The mother, who Michael would later learn was named Helen, hesitated for a few more seconds. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at her daughter, then at him, then at that table, prepared with such care and so much loneliness. Then she took a deep breath, wiped her hands on the apron she was still wearing, and nodded. And in that gigantic hall with its soaring ceilings, empty of people and full of echoes, a timid happy birthday began. The girl's voice led with enthusiastic and sincere off-key notes. Helen's voice trembled with embarrassment, with emotion, with a confusing mix of feelings she couldn't name. And Michael's voice simply didn't come out. He just sat there, motionless, his eyes fixed on these two people he didn't know, watching a moment he never imagined he would live again. Tears began to stream down his face and he couldn't control them. They weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of someone who finally felt seen. When the last note ended, Leah clapped by herself, excited, pleased with her own performance. "Now you have to make a wish," she exclaimed, with all the seriousness of someone explaining the sacred rules of birthdays. Michael looked at the candle. His eyes were teary, but he no longer cared about hiding it. He picked up the lighter that was next to the cake, lit the candle with trembling hands, and watched the flame for a long moment. He thought of so many things. He thought of all the previous birthdays. He thought of the family he had lost in a car accident when he was 23. He thought of the 18 years he had spent alone, building an empire but losing himself in the process. He thought of how much money he had, and how that money had never bought him what he really needed. He leaned forward, blew out the flame with a gentle puff, and for the first time in years, he wished for something that didn't involve profit, expansion, contracts, or power. He wished he would never feel invisible again. He wished that this moment, so simple and yet so impossible, wasn't just an exception, but the beginning of something different. The girl smiled, completely satisfied. There. Now it's not a sad birthday anymore. Helen tried to thank him, visibly flustered, pulling her daughter by the hand. "Thank you so much for your understanding, Mr. Thompson. We'll leave you in peace now." But before she could take Leah away, Before that moment could dissolve, like all the other good moments in his life, Michael spoke, and his voice sounded firm for the first time that night. "Would you like a piece of cake?" The two looked at each other. Helen seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. Leah was already climbing back onto her chair before her mother could even answer. "Can we, Mum? Please?" Helen looked at Michael, searching for any sign that this was just politeness, that he actually wanted them to leave. But what she saw in his eyes was something that touched her deeply. Loneliness. The same loneliness she knew well, that she carried every day when she went home after cleaning other people's houses, when she lay alone in bed and thought about everything she had, lost along the way. It was a different kind of loneliness than hers, born of opposite circumstances, but in the end, it was the same thing. It was the feeling of being in the world without belonging anywhere. "It would be an honor," she said softly. And so, at that table set for a lonely man, 3 people who didn't belong to the same world began to share not just a cake, but a moment that would definitively change the course of their lives. Michael cut the cake carefully, served generous slices on the fine china plates, and the 3 of them ate in silence at first, each processing in their own way the strangeness and beauty of that unlikely encounter. Leah was the first to break the silence, as children always are. "Do you live all by yourself in this whole house?" she asked, with her mouth still full of cake. "Leah!" Helen scolded. "It's okay," Michael said, and for the first time in a long time, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Yes, I live alone." "But why? The house is so big." "It is big," he agreed, looking around as if seeing the space for the first time. "Too big, actually. At our place, we share one small room, me and my mum," Leah continued, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "But it's not sad. We talk before we go to sleep. My mum tells me stories. Sometimes we laugh so hard the neighbor bangs on the wall." Michael looked at Helen, who was completely red with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. She has no filter." "You don't need to apologize," he said, and there was something new in his voice, something Helen couldn't identify. "It's good to hear these things, these real things." Helen didn't know what to say. For years, she and her daughter had been treated as invisible, people who entered the homes of the rich, cleaned, organized, and left without a trace, without being noticed, without anyone wanting to know their names, their stories, their dreams. And here was one of the richest men in New York, owner of a network of companies she didn't even know what they did, saying it was good to hear about her life. It was surreal. "Do you have a family?" Leah asked, relentless. Helen closed her eyes, mortified. Michael was silent for a moment. His hands gripped the fork so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I did," he said finally, "but I lost them all in an accident. A long time ago." Leah stopped eating. Her big eyes filled with an understanding that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Is that why you're always alone?" "Leah, that's enough," Helen said, more firmly now, holding her daughter's hand. "No, it's okay," Michael said, and his voice was choked with emotion. "She's right. That's exactly why, after they were gone, I didn't know how to be around other people anymore. It was easier to be alone, to work, to build things, companies, numbers, anything but feel." The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was a silence of respect, of mutual recognition of pain. Helen looked at this man and saw not the millionaire boss, but someone who had spent 18 years trying to survive his own life, just like her. "I understand," she said softly. "When Leah's father left, I also thought it would be easier not to trust anyone again, not to open up, just take care of her and work, but Leah wouldn't let me. She's too stubborn." Leah smiled, proud. "It's true, I'm very stubborn." Michael laughed. It was a small, rusty laugh from someone who hadn't laughed in so long he'd almost forgotten how. But it was real. "I can see that." They kept talking. Leah told him about school, about the teacher she loved, about the dog she wanted but couldn't have because their apartment didn't allow pets. Helen spoke little, but when she did, Michael noticed a sharp intelligence, a perceptiveness that life had forced upon her. She asked questions about the house, about what it was like to take care of something so big, And Michael realized they weren't just polite questions. She was genuinely interested, observing every detail with eyes that saw beyond the obvious. When the clock struck 10, Helen jumped to her feet. "Oh my gosh, it's so late. Leah, we have to go. Mr. Thompson must be tired." But Michael didn't want them to leave. For the first time in years, he didn't want to go back to the silence. He didn't want to climb that enormous staircase and lie in a king-size bed alone, staring at the ceiling and counting the hours until the next day began, and everything started over again. Do you come here often?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I work here 3 times a week," Helen said, "but I usually leave Leah with a neighbor. It's just that today she couldn't watch her, so—" "Bring her with you," Michael said, the words tumbling out before he could think them through. "I mean, if she has nowhere else to stay. The house is big. There's a library, a game room that no one uses. She can stay there while you work." Helen was shocked. "Mr. Thompson, I couldn't possibly accept that. Please," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice she had never heard from any boss. "It was the best birthday I've had in many years. Not because of the cake, because of you." Helen looked at her daughter, who was already bouncing with excitement at the prospect, and then looked back at Michael. There was something about this man that moved her deeply. He wasn't being condescending. He wasn't offering charity. He was asking for company. "Only if you promise that if she's a bother, you'll tell me. I promise. And she'll behave. She won't touch anything. She won't make a mess. You don't have to worry." Leah was already hugging Michael before Helen could say another word. The hug caught him completely off guard. It had been so long since anyone had hugged him that he froze for a second, not knowing what to do with his arms. Then slowly, like someone remembering a forgotten movement, he wrapped the little girl in an awkward but sincere embrace. When they finally left, taking with them pieces of cake wrapped in aluminum foil that Michael insisted they take, he stood at the door watching them walk through the garden, to the gate. Helen held Leah's hand and the girl skipped along, excitedly telling her mother something he couldn't hear, but he could see the smile on Helen's face. He could see that something had changed in her too. He went back inside the house. The silence was still there, but now it was different. It was no longer a silence of absence, it was a silence of anticipation. The table was still there, with the used plates, cake crumbs, the extinguished candle. He didn't call anyone to clean up. He sat there looking at the remnants of an improvised celebration, and for the first time in 18 years he felt he had something worth waking up for the next day. That night, Michael didn't fall asleep thinking about numbers, meetings, or business strategies. He fell asleep thinking about an 8-year-old girl who refused to accept that birthdays could be sad. And he fell asleep thinking about a woman who worked as a cleaning lady but had the depth of someone who had lived many lives in her eyes. He fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to build something that truly mattered. Across the city, in a small one-room apartment in the Bronx, Helen was putting Leah to bed while the girl was still chattering excitedly about the birthday man, the huge house, and how he seemed sad but got happy when they sang to him. Helen tucked her daughter in, kissed her forehead, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed watching her sleep. There was something different in the air, a feeling that something important had happened that night, something she couldn't yet name. But it was there, pulsing, promising that nothing would ever be quite the same again. She thought about the way Michael had looked at Leah. It wasn't the condescending gaze of a rich man observing a poor thing. It was the look of someone who saw in that child something he had lost long ago. Humanity. Connection. Truth. Helen knew that kind of loneliness. She knew the weight of waking up every day and pretending everything was fine when inside there was a vast emptiness. She had spent the last few years like that, ever since David left her pregnant, alone, without explanation. Ever since she had abandoned her dream of being a chef to work wherever she could, doing whatever it took to put food on the table. Ever since she had stopped seeing herself as a person with dreams and had become just someone who survived. But that night, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as the cleaning lady, as Helen, as someone who mattered, and that scared her as much as it comforted her. The following week, when Helen returned to work, Leah came with her, Michael was waiting for them with a stack of children's books he had bought that morning, not knowing exactly which ones would be appropriate, but wanting there to be options. Leah dove into the books with enthusiasm, and Michael watched from a distance, pretending to read emails on his laptop, but actually paying attention to every laugh, every exclamation of surprise from the girl. Helen worked faster than usual, worried about taking advantage of her boss's generosity, but he asked her not to rush, to do things at her own pace, and so began a strange and wonderful routine. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Helen arrived with Leah. The girl would settle in the library, and Michael found himself making excuses to pass by to grab a book he didn't need, to ask if she needed anything. The conversation started small. Leah talked about school, her classmates, her teacher. Michael asked questions, genuinely interested. She showed him drawings she made, and he praised them with a sincerity that surprised himself. It wasn't the automatic praise of an adult who isn't paying attention. He really looked at the drawings, noticed the details, asked questions about the chosen colors, about what each thing represented. In a few short weeks, something extraordinary was happening. Michael was no longer just the lonely boss in the huge house. Leah had started to treat him like a friend. She told him childish secrets, shared cookies with him, asked his opinion on things that worried her, and he, in turn, found himself sharing things he hadn't shared with anyone. He talked about the family he'd lost, about the pain that never went away, about the emptiness that money couldn't fill. He spoke in a simple way, one that an 8-year-old could understand, but with a brutal honesty he didn't know he still possessed. And Leah listened, really listened. She asked questions, offered spontaneous hugs when she sensed he was sad, said things like, "I'm sorry and I like you," in a way so genuine it broke and mended his heart at the same time. Helen watched all of this from a distance, with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude because she saw her daughter flourishing, having access to things she could never provide. New books, space, attention. But fear because she knew it couldn't last. She knew that sooner or later, Michael would realize he had better things to do than spend time with a child who was nothing to him. She knew that sooner or later they would become invisible again. And when that happened, Leah would get hurt, and she would have to pick up the pieces again. But for now, she let it happen. Because it had been so long since she had seen her daughter so happy, and because she had to admit, it had been so long since she herself had felt less alone. Even while working, even while cleaning, she felt like she was part of something, that there was a real connection in that house, and that was dangerous. But it was also too beautiful to refuse. The following months were perhaps the strangest and most transformative of Michael August Thompson's life. He, who had always woken up at 5 in the morning to read financial reports, who spent his weekends reviewing contracts and planning acquisitions, began to structure his routine around the days Helen and Leah would be at the house. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays were the days he looked forward to. The days when the Upper East Side mansion ceased to be a luxurious mausoleum and became something he had forgotten existed, a home. Leah had that extraordinary ability of children to ask questions no one else dares to ask. One of those Saturdays, she was sitting on the library floor, surrounded by books, drawing something in an old notebook Helen had bought at a neighborhood stationery store. Michael pretended to be working on his laptop, but he was actually watching the girl, fascinated by the concentration on her face, by the way she stuck her tongue out as she tried to make a perfect drawing. "Mr. Michael," she said suddenly, without looking up from her notebook, "why don't you ever have anyone over?" He stopped typing. It was a simple, even childish question, but it carried immense weight. "I have you over," he said, trying to deflect. "But I mean like your family, friends, a girlfriend." Michael sighed. He closed the laptop. If he had learned anything from Leah, it was that she didn't accept empty answers. "I don't have a girlfriend. And friends, I don't think I have those anymore either." "Why not?" "Because after my family died, I pushed everyone away. I thought it would be easier not to feel anything." Leah finally looked up from her drawing. "And was it? Was what? Easier?" Michael looked into those brown eyes, so much like her mother's, so full of genuine curiosity. And for the first time he admitted out loud something he didn't even know he thought. "No, it was horrible," Leah nodded, as if that made perfect sense. My mum gets really sad sometimes. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. She cries real quiet when she thinks I'm asleep. I think she's trying not to feel anything too, but it's not working." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He glanced toward the library door, from where he could hear Helen vacuuming the hallway. Did she know her daughter noticed everything? Had anyone ever asked Helen how she was really doing? "Your mum is a very strong person," Michael said. "I know, but sometimes I wish she didn't have to be so strong. I wish someone would take care of her too." The sentence hung in the air. Michael didn't know what to say, but the seed had been planted. That same week he started paying more attention to Helen, not in an invasive way, but observing. He noticed she always arrived in the same uniform, faded from so many washes. He noticed she brought a packed lunch from home, simple food, while he let a full refrigerator of food go bad because he ate out every day. He noticed she limped slightly on her right leg, but never complained. He noticed that her eyes, when she thought no one was looking, carried a weariness that went far beyond the physical. And he noticed something else. When Helen thought she was alone, she would hum, softly, almost in a whisper. And when Michael paid attention to what she was doing, he realized she wasn't just cleaning. She was reorganizing, bringing a new order to the rooms, placing plants in strategic spots, subtly suggesting through actions and not words that this house could be more than an empty space. One day he found her in the kitchen. She wasn't cleaning. She was looking at the immense cabinets, filled with expensive pots and pans no one used, state-of-the-art appliances still in their boxes. Her face had an expression Michael couldn't decipher: nostalgia, sadness, longing. "Helen," he called. She startled, turning around quickly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry, I was just—" "Do you like to cook?" he asked, and it wasn't a casual question. Helen was silent for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer, with the truth or with what a boss would want to hear. I used to love it," she said finally. "Before." "Before what?" "Before everything fell apart." Michael walked into the kitchen, came closer. He kept a respectful distance, but his presence invited confidence. "Tell me." And Helen told him. She told him she had gone to culinary school, that she had worked in 2 good restaurants downtown, that she dreamed of having her own business one day, something small, cozy, where the food was made with love and not just technique. She told him that when she got pregnant with Leah, the girl's father disappeared, that she tried to keep working in kitchens but the hours were incompatible with having a small child, that she was fired from 2 jobs because she needed to leave early to pick up her daughter from daycare, that eventually she gave up and started cleaning houses, because at least that way she had flexible hours and could be there for Leah. "And you never cooked again?" Michael asked. "At home, always, for Leah. But professionally?" "No. It's been 6 years." "Why not?" Helen laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. "Because the world doesn't let you, Mr. Thompson. Because I don't have connections anymore. Because I have no way to invest. Because I have to pay rent, utilities, buy food. Because dreams are a luxury for those who can afford to dream." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael looked at this woman, at the weariness in her eyes, at the rough hands from scrubbing other people's floors, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: indignation. Not for his own situation, as he often felt in business when something didn't go as planned, but indignation at the waste of seeing someone with so much talent, so much passion, reduced to being invisible. "Cook for me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Tomorrow. Cook something for me. Anything you want to make. Use whatever you need from the kitchen. I'll buy whatever ingredients you ask for." Helen was shocked. "Mr. Thompson, I can't—" "You can, and you will. It's not a request, it's a—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's a gift. For you." Helen felt her eyes well up. How long had it been since someone had given her something like this? A space, an opportunity, a chance to be seen for who she was, and not just for what she did. "Thank you," she whispered. The next day, Helen arrived with a bag of simple ingredients. Michael had offered money, but she refused. She wanted to make something with what she knew how to use, with what she was familiar with. Leah stayed in the library, but every 15 minutes she ran to the kitchen to see what her mum was doing. And Michael, who had an important meeting scheduled for that afternoon, cancelled everything and sat at the kitchen counter watching Helen work. It was like watching a dance. Her hands moved with a precision and grace he had never seen in anyone. She wasn't just cooking, she was creating. Every movement had a purpose. Every spice was added with perfect timing, and as she worked, she hummed that song Michael had heard before, and her face was transfigured. She was no longer the tired cleaning lady. She was an artist in her element. When the dish was ready, a mushroom risotto with fresh herbs and shaved parmesan, the aroma filled the entire house. Michael's stomach rumbled, but more than hunger, he felt anticipation. Helen served the plate with trembling hands. "I hope you like it," she said, and there was so much fear and so much hope in her voice that Michael wanted to hug her and say he already loved it just from seeing the passion with which she had made it. He picked up his fork, took a bite, and closed his eyes. It wasn't just food. It was memory. It was emotion. It was everything he had forgotten food could be. When he opened his eyes again, they were moist. "Helen, this is extraordinary." She let out the breath she had been holding. Really, I forgot food could be like this, that it could have a soul." Helen smiled, and it was a genuine smile that lit up her entire tired face. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You have no idea how much this means to me." "Michael," he said. "Just Michael, no Mr." It was in that moment, in that kitchen filled with the smell of risotto and possibilities, that Michael made a decision that would change not only Helen's life, but his own and those of dozens of other people. In the following weeks, Michael began to ask questions, discreet but targeted. He asked Helen about other women she knew, women who worked cleaning houses but who used to have other professions. And he discovered there were many. There was Helen's cousin who had a degree in accounting but couldn't get a job because she had 3 small children, and no employer wanted to deal with the inevitable absences. There was the neighbor who had been a seamstress but lost sight in one eye in an accident and was let go. There was the friend from church who had a computer skills certificate but no way to update her knowledge because she didn't have a computer at home. They were stories of waste, of talent thrown away, of women who had become invisible not for lack of ability, but because the system was structured not to see them. And Michael, who had spent 18 years building companies, accumulating wealth, expanding businesses, realized for the first time that he had built his empire on the foundation of ignoring these stories, that he had been part of the problem, that his company, like so many others, hired these women for invisible services and never asked what else they could be. The idea came to him during a sleepless night. He was lying in bed thinking of Helen in the kitchen, thinking of Leah asking why he lived alone, thinking of all the wasted years trying not to feel. And the idea emerged complete, clear, inevitable. A social gastronomy project, not charity, not welfare, but a real training and employment program for women like Helen, women with talent, with stories, with dreams that had been suffocated by survival. On Monday, he called an emergency board meeting. 11 men and 2 women, all well-dressed, all well-paid, all surprised by the urgent summons. Michael walked into the boardroom with something he hadn't felt in years, nervousness. Not nervousness about numbers or strategies, but nervousness about something that truly mattered. "I want to propose a new project," he began, and everyone shifted in their chairs, preparing for another expansion, another acquisition, a social responsibility project. "We're going to create a restaurant, but not an ordinary restaurant, a training restaurant. We'll hire women in vulnerable situations, women who have culinary knowledge but have been excluded from the job market. We'll train them, professionalize them, and employ them with decent wages and hours compatible with motherhood." The silence in the room was thick. People looked at each other. Michael saw confusion on some faces, skepticism on others. Beatrice Miller, the CFO, was the first to speak. "With all due respect, Michael, this makes no sense from a business perspective. Gastronomy is not our core business. We have no expertise in the area, and hiring vulnerable people significantly increases operational risk." I know it doesn't make business sense, Michael said, and there was a new firmness in his voice. But it makes human sense, and it makes sense from a social impact perspective. We're going to do this not for the financial return, but because it's the right thing to do. Robert Davis, one of the oldest board members, sighed audibly. Michael, are you all right? This doesn't sound like you. It sounds sentimental. Maybe I am being sentimental, Robert. Or maybe I'm being human for the first time in many years. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something Michael couldn't identify. Concern, or something darker. Michael, can I speak with you privately? You can speak here, there are no secrets. Beatrice hesitated, then continued. You're being influenced. Personally, this is not a rational business decision. You're right. It's a decision based on values. And I'm the CEO. The final decision is mine. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Michael knew he was pushing boundaries. He knew some people there would start to question his leadership, but for the first time in years, that didn't scare him. Because for the first time he was doing something he believed was worthwhile. The board vote was close. 7 in favor, 6 against. The project was approved, but Michael knew the battle was just beginning. Beatrice left the room without looking at him. Robert stayed behind. I hope you know what you're doing, the old board member said. Me too, Michael replied honestly. When he got home that night, Helen and Leah were already gone. But there was a note on the kitchen table, written in Leah's neat handwriting. Thank you for letting my mom cook. She was so happy. You're nice, Mr. Michael. He put the note in his pocket and went up to his room. He lay down and for the first time in a long time fell asleep with the feeling that he had done something that truly mattered. In the following days, Michael threw himself into the project with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He hired consultants specializing in social gastronomy. He studied models of similar programs in other countries, and on a Thursday, he asked Helen to stay after her shift. Leah was doing her homework in the library. Michael called Helen into the living room, asked her to sit down. She obeyed, clearly nervous. I did something, he said, and I need to know if you want to be a part of it or not. No pressure. You can say no. What did you do? I proposed a social project to my company's board, a training restaurant to train and employ women who have been excluded from the job market for social reasons, and I would like you to lead this project. Helen was completely paralyzed. Her face went through several emotions in a matter of seconds. Shock, disbelief, fear, hope. Are you serious? Completely. You would be the executive chef. You'd have the autonomy to create the menu, choose the team, structure the training, a decent salary, full benefits, and hours that allow you to continue being a mother. Helen started to cry. Not the restrained crying Leah had mentioned, but a cry of years of frustration, of buried dreams, of recovered dignity. Michael didn't know what to do. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know if it was appropriate. It was Helen who closed the distance, getting up and hugging him with a force that surprised him. Thank you, she said against his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me. He hugged her back, and in that moment, he felt he was beginning to pay a debt he didn't know he had. A debt not just to Helen, but to all the invisible people who sustained his world without ever being recognized. When they separated, Leah was at the living room door, watching with that knowing smile children have when they realize something important is happening. Is my mum going to work with food again? She asked. She is, Michael said. If she wants to. She wants to, Leah said with absolute certainty. I know she does. And Helen, wiping her tears and trying to regain her composure, nodded. I do. More than anything. But not everything would be easy. Beatrice Miller, the CFO who had voted against the project, began a subtle but effective campaign of sabotage. She questioned every one of Michael's decisions in meetings, suggested to investors that he was diverting resources to unprofitable projects, planted doubts about the restaurant's viability, and worse, she started investigating Helen. She found out that Helen had been fired from one of the restaurants where she worked because of a disagreement with a customer. The story was much more complex than it seemed. The customer had harassed Helen and she had defended herself, but Beatrice took only the dismissal and began to circulate the information that Michael was entrusting the project to someone unreliable. Michael discovered the sabotage by chance, overhearing a conversation in the company hallway. He felt anger, but more than that, he felt determination. He called Beatrice for a private meeting. "You're trying to sabotage the project," he said bluntly. Beatrice didn't deny it. "I'm trying to save this company from an emotional and irresponsible decision. You're mixing your personal life with business, Michael. That never ends well." "Maybe that's exactly what I need to do. Maybe completely separating business from humanity is the problem, not the solution. You'll regret this, and when you do, don't say I didn't warn you. If I do regret it, at least it will be for trying to do the right thing." Beatrice left the room, and Michael knew he had made a powerful enemy, but he also knew he wouldn't back down, because every time he looked at Helen, he saw not just a woman reclaiming her dream, but the possibility that he himself, Michael August Thompson, could reclaim something he thought was lost forever: purpose. The following months were a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and small victories that piled up like bricks, building something bigger than any of them had imagined. The training restaurant project moved from paper to reality, taking shape in a renovated warehouse in Williamsburg, a space Michael had acquired years ago to expand one of his businesses, but had never used. Now, that empty space was being transformed into something with a soul. Walls were painted in warm colors, a professional kitchen was installed, rustic wooden tables were ordered, and Helen was at the center of it all, coordinating, deciding, creating. Michael watched her with an admiration that grew every day. Helen was no longer the tired woman who cleaned his house. She had transformed. She wore her hair down now, spoke with authority when discussing menus with suppliers, negotiated prices with a skill that surprised even the consultants Michael had hired, and most importantly, she smiled. A genuine smile that came from within, that transformed her face and made her look 10 years younger. Leah, who now spent her afternoons at the future restaurant space when she wasn't at school, ran from one side to the other, drawing pictures of the walls, suggesting colors, asking when they could start cooking for real. And Michael, who still ran his company during the day, found himself leaving the office earlier, canceling business dinners to spend his afternoons at the warehouse, helping where he could, which wasn't much, but mostly watching this miracle happen. It was Helen who suggested the name. Second Act. Simple, direct, true. Michael loved it. They hired a designer to create a beautiful but accessible brand identity. The facade got a discreet wooden sign. And then came the most important part: selecting the women who would be part of the first class. Helen insisted on being part of every interview. There were 52 candidates, women of all ages, all with heartbreaking stories, single mothers, widows, women who had lost their jobs after 40, women who had cared for sick children and been punished for it in the job market. Helen listened to each story with a painful attention, because she saw herself in each of those women. She saw the desperation, the humiliation, the exhaustion of trying and failing. And she also saw the spark of hope that appeared when they understood that this wasn't charity, but a real opportunity. In the end, they chose 10 women. Marlene, 52, who had been a cook for a wealthy family for 20 years, and was fired without notice when the family moved abroad. Jessica, 28, a mother of triplets, who had dropped out of culinary school when she got pregnant. Rosa, 61, who made pastries to sell at the local market, but dreamed of having her own business. Each had her story, her dream, her wound. The first day of training was emotional. Helen had prepared a speech, but when she saw all those women gathered, dressed in the new uniforms Michael had ordered, their eyes shining with a mixture of fear and expectation, she simply couldn't stick to the script. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "I know what you're feeling right now," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know the fear of not being good enough. I know the shame of having been invisible for so long. I know the pain of having a talent and not being able to use it. But I also know that you are more than you imagine. You are survivors. You are mothers, daughters, sisters who held your families together when everything was falling apart. And now, you are going to show the world what you've always known, that you are capable of extraordinary things. There was applause, there were tears, there were hugs between women who didn't know each other but recognized themselves in one another. And then the real work began. Helen was a natural leader, demanding but fair, firm but compassionate. She taught techniques, yes, but she also taught about dignity, about pride in one's work, about the importance of every dish being made with love. And the women flourished. Marlene, who had spent years doing what her employers told her without being able to create anything, began to develop her own recipes, mixing classic techniques with flavors from her childhood. Jessica discovered she had a special talent for baking, making cakes that were works of art. Rosa brought the wisdom of her market pastries and transformed them into gourmet appetizers that made anyone swoon. Michael went to second act every day. He would sit in a corner of the kitchen, watch, sometimes help with the dishes, which caused laughter among the women who couldn't believe a millionaire was there with his hands in the sink. But the most important thing was the conversation. He talked with all of them, asked about their lives, their children, their dreams. And they slowly stopped seeing him as the rich boss and started seeing him as part of the project, as someone who genuinely cared. Leah, who now considered second act her second home, had bonded with all the women. She helped Rosa make fudge, watched Jessica decorate cakes, listened to Marlene's stories about the places she had worked. And the women, in turn, adopted Leah as the project's mascot. They made sure to prepare special snacks for her, helped with her homework, gave her advice she loved to hear. But not everything was harmonious. Beatrice's sabotage continued, now more aggressively. She began contacting the project's suppliers, suggesting they not sell to second act because the company was in financial trouble, which was a lie. She managed to convince 2 important suppliers to cancel their contracts. When Michael found out, he confronted her again. "You're not going to stop, are you?" he asked, furious. "Not until you wake up from this delusion," Beatrice replied coldly. "You're wasting company resources on poorly planned charity. You're risking the reputation we've spent years building. And for what? Because of a cleaning lady and a child who made you feel less lonely. It's pathetic, Michael." Beatrice's words hurt more than Michael expected, not because he believed them, but because they touched on a secret fear he carried. Was he doing this for the right reasons? Was he just trying to fill the void in his own life at the expense of other people? Were Helen and Leah being used to make him feel better about himself? That night, he didn't go to second act. He stayed alone in the mansion, walking through the empty rooms, thinking, questioning, doubting. It was Helen who called, worried because he hadn't shown up, and he always did. "Michael, is everything okay?" she asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "Helen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course, ask away. Am I doing this for the right reasons, or am I being selfish, using you all to make myself feel better?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Helen spoke, and her voice was firm. "Michael, since this project started, I've felt alive for the first time in years. The women who work with me feel seen, respected, valued. Leah has a role model in her mother that she never had before. A mother who doesn't have to humiliate herself to survive. If you're doing this to feel better, great, because it means that doing good makes you feel good. There's nothing selfish about that. There's generosity, there's courage, and there's love." The word love hung between them. Neither of them commented on it, but they both felt its weight. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome. And Michael, show up tomorrow. The girls miss you." He showed up. And he showed up the next day. And the next, and slowly Beatrice's sabotage lost its power because the project was too strong to be brought down by ill will. Second Act opened its doors 3 months after the training began. The opening was simple but beautiful. Just friends, families of the women who worked there, and a few journalists Helen had invited. It wasn't a corporate event. It was a real celebration. The tables were full. The menu was a celebration of American comfort food made with technique and love. Marlene's shrimp gumbo, Jessica's key lime pie, Rosa's gourmet chicken croquettes. Every dish told a story, and people noticed. A food critic who was there by chance wrote a passionate review the next day. "The food is extraordinary," the review said, "but what makes this place special is the soul. You can feel in every bite that this food was made by someone who knows the value of a second chance." The article went viral. Suddenly, Second Act was the talk of New York. Reservations started pouring in. The media began to cover not just the restaurant, but the story behind it. Helen gave interviews, talked about her journey, about the women who worked with her. And Michael, who usually shunned the spotlight, agreed to a few interviews as well, talking about real social responsibility, about how companies can and should make a difference. It was on one of those busy afternoons at Second Act that the incident that almost destroyed everything happened. Leah was in the kitchen, as usual, helping to pack up sweets to take home. Suddenly she started complaining of a headache. Helen, busy with orders, told her to rest for a bit. But minutes later, Leah fainted. The panic was instantaneous. Helen dropped everything, ran to her daughter. Michael, who was in the dining room, heard the scream and ran too. Leah was pale, breathing with difficulty. An ambulance was called. And it was only at the hospital, while doctors examined the girl, that Helen discovered something that shook her to her core. Months ago, Leah had listed Michael as her emergency contact on her school form without telling her mother. When the doctor called for Michael Thompson in the waiting room, Helen looked at him with an expression that mixed shock, anger, and something she didn't want to admit. Fear. Fear that she had lost control of the situation. Fear that her daughter had formed such a strong bond with this man that she, Helen, had become secondary. Fear of being replaced. Michael saw Helen's expression and understood immediately. He approached her slowly, like one approaches a wounded animal. "Helen, I didn't know she did that. I swear." "She listed you as her emergency contact," Helen said, her voice trembling. "She didn't even tell me. What does that mean, Michael? That she trusts you more than me?" "No. It means she loves you so much that she wants to make sure you always have support. She knows you're strong, but she also knows you don't have to be strong alone." Helen started to cry. It was years of tension, of holding everything together on her own, of never being able to show weakness. And there in that hospital corridor, with her daughter being examined and a man she had barely known a few months ago, but who had changed her entire life, she finally broke down. Michael hugged her. He said nothing. He just held her as she cried, as she let out all the exhaustion, all the fear, all the gratitude, and all the confusion she felt. When the doctors finally came out, they had good news. Leah had fainted due to a drop in blood pressure, likely related to a growth spurt and stress. Nothing serious. A few hours of observation and she could go home. Helen went into the room where her daughter was, pale but awake, and hugged her with a force that made Leah complain. "Mum, you're squishing me. I'm sorry. I was so scared." Leah looked at her mother, then at Michael, who was standing at the doorway, unsure if he should come in or give them privacy. "Mr. Michael," she called, "you can come in." He entered, hesitant. Helen made space next to the bed. Leah took both of their hands. "I put his name at school because I want you two to be my friends," she said with that brutal honesty of childhood. "I don't want you to be just a boss and an employee. I want you to be a family, because families take care of each other." Helen and Michael looked at each other over the hospital bed, and in that look, something shifted. Something that had been growing for months, something neither of them had dared to name, was finally acknowledged. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just a successful social project. It was something deeper, more frightening, more true. "You're right," Helen said, looking at her daughter but speaking to them both. "Families take care of each other." Michael couldn't speak. He just squeezed Leah's hand and nodded. In the days that followed, something fundamental changed between Helen and Michael. They didn't talk about it, didn't name it, didn't define it, but it was palpable. He started spending more time at Second Act, not just observing but actively participating. He helped plan expansions, suggested marketing strategies, used his contacts to get stories in major newspapers. But he also did small things. He brought Helen coffee when she forgot to take a break, played with Leah when she got bored, listened to the other women's stories and remembered details they had told him weeks ago. And Helen, in turn, began to take care of him in subtle ways. She would save a plate for him on days he arrived late and had missed dinner. She would ask how things were going at the company, about Beatrice's sabotage, about whether he was sleeping well. And sometimes, when they thought no one was looking, they would exchange glances that lasted a few seconds longer than they should have. It was Rosa who noticed first. "How long are you two going to keep pretending?" she asked one day while preparing pastry dough. "Pretending what?" Helen asked, trying to sound innocent. "That you're not in love with each other, of course." Helen blushed. "Rosa, it's not like that. He's my boss. He's the owner of the project. It would be inappropriate." "What's inappropriate is wasting a chance at happiness because of social conventions," Rosa said with the wisdom of someone who has lived a long life. "You think I don't see it? That we don't see it, the way he looks at you, the way you smile when he arrives? That's love, girl. And love is too rare to be ignored." Helen didn't answer, but Rosa's words echoed in her for the next few days. Could it be possible? Was it crazy? How could someone like Michael, with all his wealth, his whole life, be genuinely interested in someone like her? And more importantly, would it be fair to Leah to create expectations that could be shattered if it didn't work out? Across the city, in the empty mansion on the Upper East Side, Michael had the same questions. He could no longer imagine his life without Helen and Leah. They had become the reason he woke up every day. But how could he propose something more without seeming like he was using his position of power? How could he ensure Helen didn't feel pressured? How could he do this right? It was Leah who once again resolved the situation with the brutal simplicity of children. On a Saturday afternoon, while the three of them were at second act after hours, preparing a special dinner just for themselves, she stopped in the middle of chopping tomatoes and said, "You two should date." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen almost dropped the knife. Michael choked on the water he was drinking. "Leah," Helen exclaimed, "that's none of your business." "But it should be," the girl insisted. "You guys look at each other when you think no one's watching. You smile more when you're together. And you're already kind of a family, except nobody wants to admit it." Michael and Helen looked at each other, and then, for the first time, they laughed together at the impossible, absurd, and wonderful situation they found themselves in. "She's not wrong," Michael said, his voice serious now. "About us being a family. You saved me, Helen. I was alive, but I wasn't living. And now? Now you're living," Helen completed softly. "Yes, and it's thanks to you. To both of you." Helen took a deep breath. It was time to be brave. It was time to take a risk. "I feel that way too," she said. "Scared, confused, but happy. Happier than I've been in years." Leah clapped, satisfied. "There, now you can kiss." "Leah," they both exclaimed at the same time, but laughing. They didn't kiss that night, but something was said, was acknowledged, was put out into the world, and they both knew that from then on there was no going back. The weeks following that conversation at second act were perhaps the most intense and transformative in the lives of everyone involved. Michael and Helen didn't immediately define what they were to each other, but they also no longer denied what they felt. There was a new lightness between them, a complicity that went beyond the professional. He started having dinner at second act almost every night, staying until closing, helping to organize the kitchen, and Helen, for the first time in years, allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something more than survival. She deserved happiness. But happiness, as always, came with challenges. Beatrice Miller intensified her attacks, not just sabotaging suppliers, but now planting negative stories in the press. A smaller newspaper published a report insinuating that second act was a front for embezzling funds from Michael's company. The article had no proof, was based on anonymous sources who were clearly people influenced by Beatrice, but it still caused damage. Some customers cancelled reservations, Some of Michael's company's investors began to publicly question his decisions. Helen was devastated. She, who had achieved everything with so much hard work, saw her reputation being tarnished. The other women in the project were scared, fearing that everything would fall apart. Marlene, Jessica, Rosa, they all looked to Helen, expecting her to have answers, to be strong as she always was. But Helen was tired of being strong. She was tired of fighting. She was seriously considering giving up, going back to cleaning houses, protecting her daughter from this media circus. It was Michael who stopped her. One night after everyone had gone home and second act was empty and quiet, he found Helen sitting alone in the kitchen crying softly. He sat next to her, said nothing at first, just stayed there, present. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken. "I can't take it anymore, Michael. My whole life I've fought. I fought to finish school, I fought to get a job, I fought to raise Leah alone. I fought not to sink when everything was falling apart. And when I finally thought I could rest, that I could have something good, this happens. People attacking me, destroying everything. I don't know if it's worth it anymore." Michael took her hands in his. "It is. It's worth it because what you've built here is real. It's worth it because 10 women have their dignity because of you. It's worth it because your daughter has a role model in her mother that she'll carry for the rest of her life. It's worth it because you taught me that it's worth feeling, that it's worth caring, that it's worth being human. Don't let Beatrice win. Don't let fear win." "But what if I'm not strong enough?" "Then we'll be strong together. You don't have to carry this alone, not anymore." Helen looked at him, at this man who a few months ago was just the distant boss in the huge mansion, and saw not just support, but love. Real, complicated, imperfect, but true love. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to receive that love without questioning it, without thinking she didn't deserve it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me. That's what families are for." The word family echoed between them again, but this time there was no doubt what it meant. The next day, Michael called a press conference. He didn't tell anyone on the board, didn't ask for approval. He simply decided it was time to put the truth out into the world. The press conference was scheduled to take place at second act itself. Journalists from major outlets attended, curious about what the CEO of one of New York's most respected companies had to say. Michael began his speech by telling the story of his 41st birthday. He spoke of the loneliness, of how he had built an empire, but lost himself. He spoke of an 8-year-old girl who refused to accept that birthdays should be sad. He spoke of Helen, of her wasted talent, of the 10 women whose stories represented thousands of other women made invisible by the system. And then, with a firmness that surprised even himself, he said, "This project is not charity. It's justice. It's recognizing that our society is structured in a way that wastes talent just because these people don't fit into convenient boxes. And if anyone thinks I'm misusing funds, I invite them to come here, examine every account, every receipt, every decision. Because I have nothing to hide. What I have is pride. Pride in what we've built. Pride in these women who have transformed their pain into extraordinary dishes. And if that bothers someone, the problem isn't ours. It's with those who can't see humanity beyond the numbers." The room erupted in camera flashes. Questions were shouted. But it was when Helen stood up next to him that silence fell. She hadn't prepared a speech, but when she took the microphone, the words came from her heart. "I was a cleaning lady for 6 years," she said, and there was a dignity in her voice that made everyone pay attention. "Not because I chose to be, but because the world decided that a single mother didn't deserve to be more than that. It forgot I had training. It forgot I had talent. It forgot I was human. Second act didn't give me charity. It gave me back my dignity. And it gave back the dignity of every woman who works with me. We are not victims. We are survivors. And now we are also the protagonists of our own stories." The impact was immediate. Michael and Helen's speeches went viral on social media. Major newspapers ran in-depth stories about the project. A TV show invited Helen to tell her story. And most importantly, other companies started contacting Michael, wanting to know how to implement similar projects. Beatrice tried one last attack. She brought a motion of censure against Michael to the board, arguing that he had exposed the company unnecessarily. But this time, the board voted overwhelmingly in Michael's favor. Even Robert Davis, the skeptical board member who had questioned the project at the beginning, voted in favor. And Beatrice, realizing she had lost, resigned at that same meeting. When Michael told Helen, she didn't feel satisfaction at Beatrice's defeat. She felt relief. Relief to finally be able to focus on what mattered, making Second Act grow. And grow it did. Within 6 months, the restaurant was one of the most sought after in New York. In a year, Michael proposed an expansion, 2 more locations in the city, each employing another 10 women. Helen became not just the executive chef, but the director of the company's entire social division. She coordinated the restaurants, planned expansions, gave lectures at universities, and Michael was by her side every step of the way, not as a boss, but as a partner. It was on one of those nights after a particularly moving lecture Helen had given at a culinary school that Michael finally said the words he had been holding back for months. "I love you." They were in the car, on their way home. Helen was tired but happy, mentally reviewing the questions the students had asked. When she heard the words, she turned to him, thinking she had misheard. "What did you say?" "I love you, Helen. I think I've loved you since that first night, when you sang Happy Birthday to me. Or maybe since I saw you in the kitchen looking at those empty cabinets with such longing in your eyes. Or maybe I've always loved you, I just didn't know I was waiting for you. But now I know, and I can't pretend anymore that this is just gratitude or just a professional partnership. It's love. And I need you to know." Helen felt tears stream down her face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of someone who had finally come home. "I love you too," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm scared. I'm scared this is too good to be true. I'm scared I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream. Then we'll be scared together, but we won't give up." They kissed for the first time there in the car parked in front of Helen's house, a kiss that carried months of tension, of restrained desire, of love growing in silence. And when they finally separated, they were both smiling like teenagers. Telling Leah was easy. In fact, Leah already knew before they even told her. When they sat down to break the news, she just rolled her eyes in that way only pre-teens can. "Finally, I thought you two would never get it. Together." "You're not surprised?" Helen asked. "Mom, everyone knew but you guys. Even Rosa made a bet on when you'd finally get together." Michael and Helen looked at each other and laughed. Leah was right. Their love had been obvious to everyone but themselves. The following months were about adjustments. It wasn't easy. Michael and Helen came from different worlds, had different habits, different expectations. There were arguments about how to raise Leah, about money, about the dynamics of their relationship. But every time things got tough, they remembered one thing. It was better to fight together than to be alone. And that made all the difference. Michael sold the mansion on the Upper East Side, not because Helen asked him to, but because he realized that house had never been a home. It was just a monument to his loneliness. Instead, he bought a smaller, cozier house in a neighborhood where Leah could play outside, where there were neighbors who greeted each other, where real life was happening. Helen left the one-room apartment in the Bronx with a mixture of nostalgia and relief. That place represented years of struggle, but also years of pain. It was time to move on. The move to the new house was a celebration. All the women from Second Act helped. Marlene organized the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had organized 1,000 kitchens. Jessica made a huge welcome cake. Rosa blessed the house, saying it was important to ward off any bad energy and attract prosperity. And Leah, now 10 and getting smarter by the day, chose her own room, decorated it with posters of her favorite movies, and announced that she finally had a real family. Not just a mother, but 2 people who loved her unconditionally. 2 years after, the night of that life-changing birthday, Second Act was in 7 American cities. It employed more than 70 women. It had become a success story studied in business schools and social work programs. Michael was still at the head of his company, but now with a different purpose. It was no longer about accumulating wealth, it was about creating impact. He had completely transformed the company's culture, implementing inclusion policies, flexible hours for parents, and on-site daycare. And Helen was nationally recognized as one of the leading voices in social gastronomy in the country. She gave lectures, appeared on TV, shows, wrote articles, but what she loved most was still going into the kitchen, cooking alongside the women, listening to their stories, celebrating their victories. One Saturday morning, Michael woke up early. He made breakfast, something he had learned to do with Helen, and went upstairs to wake her. She was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, a faint smile on her lips. He watched her for a moment, marveling at how life could take such unexpected and perfect turns. When she woke up, he was sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee and a small package wrapped in plain paper. "Good morning," he said, and his smile had a hint of nervousness. "Good morning. What's this?" "Open it." Helen took the package, unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a velvet box. Her heart pounded. She looked at Michael, who was now kneeling beside the bed. "Helen, 3 years ago I was completely alone. I had everything and I had nothing. And then an 8-year-old girl walked into my dining room and refused to accept that birthdays should be sad. You and Leah saved me. You taught me that money can't buy what really matters. You taught me that it's worth feeling, it's worth caring, it's worth loving. And I want to spend the rest of my life learning with you, building with you, loving you. Helen, will you marry me?" Inside the box was a simple, elegant ring without any ostentation. Perfect. Helen started to cry, laughing at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He placed the ring on her finger, and then he kissed her. It was a kiss that promised not perfection, but commitment. Not ease, but partnership. Not loneliness. Never again. Leah, who had obviously been hiding on the other side of the door, listening to everything, ran into the room, jumped on the bed, and hugged them both. "I knew it. I knew you were going to get married. Can I be the flower girl?" "You can be whatever you want," Helen said, hugging her daughter with one hand and Michael with the other. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the garden of the original second act. There was no extravagance. There were simple flowers, wooden tables, food made by all the women from the project. Marlene made the cake, Jessica decorated it, Rosa organized the appetizers. It was a community celebration, because this wasn't just the union of 2 people, it was the celebration of a family that had formed against all odds. When it was time for the vows, Helen looked at Michael and said, "When I met you, you were a lonely man in a huge house, and I was an invisible woman just trying to survive. We were 2 broken people, trying to pretend everything was okay. But then Leah sang, 'Happy Birthday' to you. And you saw us, you really saw us, and from moment on, nothing was ever the same. You gave me back my dreams, you gave me back my dignity. You taught me that I deserved more than just survival, and I promised to spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve more too. You deserve love, you deserve family, you deserve to be happy." Michael was crying openly when it was his turn. "Helen, I spent 18 years trying not to feel, building walls, hiding behind money, power, success. I thought I was protecting my heart, but I was just slowly killing it. You and Leah brought me back to life. You reminded me that being alive means feeling. Even when it hurts, it means taking risks, even when you're scared. It means loving, even knowing that love is vulnerability. And I promise to never run away from that again. I promise to be present. I promise to be a father to Leah. I promise to be a partner to you. I promise that we will build a life worth living." There wasn't a dry eye at the ceremony. When the justice of the peace declared them husband and wife, the applause was deafening. And when they kissed, Leah was right there in the middle, hugging them both, refusing to be left out of a moment that was as much hers as it was theirs. The party lasted late into the night. There was dancing, laughter, stories being told and retold. The women of second act shared their own transformations. Marlene had managed to buy her own apartment for the first time in her life. Jessica was planning to open her own bakery. Rosa had become a consultant for other social gastronomy initiatives. Each of them was living proof that change was possible. When the party finally ended, and the three of them returned home exhausted but happy, Michael stood in the living room watching Helen and Leah dance in the kitchen while they put away the leftover cake. And for the first time in 18 years, he didn't feel empty. He felt whole. He felt gratitude. He felt that he was finally where he was supposed to be. That night, after putting Leah to bed, Helen and Michael sat in the backyard, watching the stars. It was a comfortable silence, the kind of silence between people who don't need to fill every moment with words because they understand each other without them. "Do you think we'll make it?" Helen asked suddenly. "Keep all of this, second act, our marriage, the happiness?" Michael took her hand. "I think we'll have hard days. We'll fight. We'll disagree. We'll have moments when we question everything. But I also think we'll wake up every day and choose to stay together, choose to fight for what we've built. And that's what matters. Not perfection, but commitment." Helen rested her head on his shoulder. "I still can't believe this all started with a kid singing happy birthday." Everything important in life starts with small things. A gesture, a word, a choice to care when it would be easier not to. "You've changed," Helen said. "Since that night. You're not that lonely man anymore. You've changed too. You're not the invisible woman anymore. We grew up together. And we'll keep growing." 5 years later, Second Act was present in 20 American cities. It employed over 200 women. It had become more than a social project. It was a movement. It inspired other companies to create similar initiatives. It changed labor laws in some states, forcing companies to have inclusion policies for single mothers. It transformed the lives not only of the women who worked directly in the restaurants, but of their families, and of other women who saw in their stories the possibility of starting over too. Helen had written a book telling her story and the story of the project. The book became a bestseller. All the royalties were invested back into Second Act. Michael had become one of the leading advocates for corporate social responsibility in the country. He spoke at international conferences, advised other companies, used his influence to push for systemic change. And Leah, now 15, had decided. She wanted to study public policy. She wanted to understand how laws could be changed to create more opportunities for people like her mother. She was an activist, passionate, stubborn, and both Helen and Michael couldn't have been prouder. On a regular Thursday afternoon, Michael came home from work early. He found Helen in the kitchen testing a new recipe. She was focused, tasting, adjusting seasonings, exactly as she had been that day years ago when she cooked for him for the first time. "Hey," he said, hugging her from behind. "Hey, you're home early." "Cancelled a meeting. I wanted to be here." "Is everything okay?" "Everything's great. I just wanted to be near you." Helen turned in his arms, smiling. "You get sentimental around your birthday." "It's true. How many years has it been?" "Since that night? 5. It feels like yesterday, and it feels like a lifetime ago." Both are true. They stood like that for a moment, embraced in the kitchen, while dinner cooked on the stove, and Leah did her homework in her room. It was an absolutely ordinary moment, and absolutely extraordinary because years ago neither of them thought moments like this were possible for them. "Thank you," Michael said suddenly. "For what?" "For not accepting that my birthday should be sad, for singing that song, for seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me a second chance to really live." Helen kissed him softly. "Thank you for doing the same for me." And there, in that ordinary kitchen of an ordinary house on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, was the proof that miracles happen. Not the grand miracles of fairy tales, but the real ones, made of daily choices to care, to love, to be present. Miracles made of vulnerability and courage. Miracles made of people who refused to give up on each other. It had all started with a child who walked into a dining room and couldn't accept that a man would celebrate his birthday alone. A child who, with the pure wisdom of childhood, understood something fundamental. No one should be alone. And from that simple moment, from that simple refusal to accept a stranger's loneliness, a family was born. A project that changed hundreds of lives was born. The proof that love, when genuine, has the power to transform not only individuals, but the world around them. Michael August Thompson was no longer the lonely man in the empty mansion. He was a husband, a father, a partner, a part of something bigger than himself. And Helen was no longer the invisible woman who cleaned other people's houses while burying her own dreams. She was a chef, a leader, an inspiration, living proof that second acts are possible at any age. And Leah, the stubborn child who refused to accept that birthdays should be sad, grew up seeing that her stubbornness had created something beautiful, that her refusal to accept injustice, even small ones, had power, and that lesson would stay with her for the rest of her life. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not the grand revolutions, but the small acts of kindness. Not the grand gestures, but the daily decision to care. Not perfection, but the commitment to keep trying, to keep loving, to keep believing that people can change, grow, and start over. That story, which began on a lonely night in an Upper East Side mansion, proved something fundamental. That family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's presence. It's the commitment to be there on the good days and the bad. It's the refusal to let someone be invisible. It's the courage to love even when it would be safer not to. And if there's any lesson in this story, it's this. Never underestimate the power of a sincerely sung happy birthday. Never underestimate the impact of truly seeing another person. Never underestimate the transformative capacity that exists when people decide to care for one another. Because that's what turned 3 lonely people into a family. That's what created a social justice movement. That's what proved that birthdays and lives don't have to be sad. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Helen, and Leah has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of second chances and transformations, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the lonely birthday, Helen's first risotto, the wedding proposal? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and proving that it's never too late to start over. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will make you believe in the power of love and second chances.